Welcome back on the Me&my Health Up podcast show. Stefan Velevski, how are you today?
I'm very well, Anthony. How are you going?
Fantastic, and really enjoyed that episode we did earlier together, which was on the right ingredients to building lean muscle mass, and it was a real hit. As soon as I uploaded it, it got lots of downloads, more than usual. So so looking forward to this conversation around another topic that really interests you because you see so much of it in your practice as an exercise physiologist, which is the management of type 2 diabetes. But before we rip into the topic, I'd love to hear, again, for those listeners that didn't listen to your previous episode, your backstory as to how you've arrived at being an exercise physiologist.
Well, I was always interested in sports and exercise growing up. And then I kind of gained a little bit of weight when I was younger and then lost a little bit too much. And then I thought, let's do something about this. So went into the gym, really fell in love with the gym. And then because I was young and naive, just went very hard and then ended up hurting myself a little bit here and there. And then from there, I discovered what the rehab pathway looked like. And that was very interesting to me to see what exercise can do to the body and how it can help so many different things. And that's kind of where I can open up my eyes to joining into the path of exercise physiology. It was just, I just really enjoy what exercise can do and how much it can help the body. So, yeah.
Exactly. And we're talking about exercise is medicine for type 2 diabetes today. And your interest in type 2 diabetes, where did that come about?
It's just because type 2 diabetes is such a prevalent condition in society today. And it's almost preventable in a way because there's so many lifestyle choices that we can make that can stop or prevent type 2 diabetes from occurring. There's so much we can do from a lifestyle point of view that really interests me. So we can really help ourselves with just changing a bit of lifestyle.
Absolutely. So let's get into some of this lifestyle management for those clients or those listeners out there, and it could be family members of the listeners that are managing type 2 diabetes. So where do you, so a client comes into you, they've been diagnosed from the doctor with type 2 diabetes. Where do you start with this client?
I'll generally start by asking them if they understand what type 2 diabetes is. And from there, I would educate them a little bit about that. And then
let's start on that. Yeah, let's talk about what is type 2 diabetes.
So it's when there's an increase in your blood sugars or blood glucose levels. So I'm sure you'll touch on this when we talk about the nutrition part, but when you eat food, carbohydrates goes into the body and that gets absorbed into the blood. Generally, when that happens, the pancreas will release insulin, and the insulin acts as a key to some of the tissues in the body. So that opens up the tissues in the body so that the glucose or the blood sugar can be stored into the muscles or the other tissue. And that kind of decreases our blood glucose levels to the normal amount that we would like to see. With type 2 diabetes, there's generally an insulin resistance. So what that means is that insulin is less effective per se. So insulin isn't working as a key so much. So less glucose is being transported into the target tissues. So that means blood glucose is staying elevated and staying high, which is not good and can have a few run-on effects that we don't like to see in the body. That's just an overall view of type 2 diabetes. And then from there, I'll go over what I like to say is there's 4 things that will influence blood glucose levels. That's what you eat, which generally increases it, but we can manage that very well and be very, very good with that, which I'll let you go about. Medication will help decrease your blood glucose levels. Stress will increase your blood glucose levels. And then exercise will generally decrease your blood glucose levels. So kind of understanding how those things come into play can really help take control of your type 2 diabetes management.
Absolutely. Yeah, you hit on a key one there is that stress factor, which is so prevalent in today's society, everyone being so busy and trying to keep up with the Joneses, it really plays havoc on people's health. It's generally, I find a lot of my clients are that sympathetic dominant state. So they're in that higher fight, flight, or freeze sort of state constantly, and constantly that's that wired state. And as you mentioned, it has a implication on our blood glucose levels. And you mentioned the insulin key becomes a bit insensitive. And, you just talked about a couple of ways in which we can. So, yeah, I'll certainly, I'm happy to talk about the nutrition side of things, but I'd love you to now get into the exercise side in terms of what you do to help with the uptake of glucose into the cell or increase that insulin sensitivity through exercise.
Mm-hmm. So through exercise, when we move, our muscles kind of act as a pump, if you want to think about it like this, and the muscles will pump the blood glucose from the blood into the muscles where it's stored. So that'll help drop our blood glucose levels. There's definite recommendations of how much exercise we should be doing. And what that looks like is we want to accumulate either 210 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity. So when I mean moderate intensity aerobic activities, if you're walking, you're swimming, you're cycling, and moderate intensity, this is an easy way to think about it, is if you think of, we call it RPE, so it's rate of perceived exertion. Just a fancy way of saying how hard are you working at the moment. So generally the scale, it goes up to 20. Okay, so we want to aim at a moderate intensity. So it's about a 12 or a 13 out of 20. So we can get a bit fancier with this and do heart rate maxes and stuff like that. But just to make it easier for yourself, a moderate intensity, 12 to 13 out of 20. So it's just a bit over that half, or around about that halfway point. We can keep going for a while, but you got that huff and puff to your breath. Or we can do a bit of a combination of vigorous intensity. So that's, if we look at that RPE scale again, it's on the higher side so between a 14 to a 16 out of 20. So that's on the aerobic side of things. We also want to do some strength training or resistance training. And ideally, we want to be doing that twice a week for about a minimum of 30 minutes per session. And generally with that resistance training, we want to be hitting the large muscle groups. So if you think about, we want to pump that glucose into the muscles. The bigger the muscle we're working, the more glucose is going to go into that muscle and have a greater effect on reducing that blood glucose levels. So the general guidelines for resistance training with type 2 diabetes is that we want to do 8 to 10 exercises of large muscle groups, so your big compound lifts, between 2 to 4 sets of 8 to 10 reps, and about a minute or two rest in between. So we want to do that twice a week. Now, probably the most important thing is that we want to exercise often. So the guideline is no more than 2 days rest between doing exercise. The more consistent we're doing it, the better it's going to be. So I generally say every second day, let's do something. Even if we're just going for a walk or doing our bit, like, it just helps tremendously. So just being consistent and doing it every second day is a really great way just to aim for the guidelines.
And there's that element that type 2 diabetes is that, that lifestyle disease where we consume too much. And I'm going to get into that as a counter strategy to that for the nutrition part. But yeah, we're consuming too much. We're sitting on the couch, watching Netflix, getting quite relaxed or very parasympathetic. I mentioned the sympathetic dominance. The parasympathetic state can obviously, be certainly a correlation factor to type 2 diabetes. People that are gaining weight and not exerting themselves enough or doing much. So that sort of lay person that hasn't been to the gym for a while, how would you work with them? Obviously, like what I just heard is quite, it's what's recommended to obviously, really manage those glucose levels. But then I'm thinking of there's that person that hasn't been in the gym for maybe, the whole of COVID. and has been, doing all the emotional eating, watching Netflix, and now they really want to get back and get started. How do you work with them?
Yeah, definitely. So what we do is we'll just guide them towards trying to get to those guidelines. So for some people that might seem a bit high and a bit out of reach, and we just set that as the goal. We want to hit this is the guidelines. We want to hit that in X amount of time. So to start off with, what we're going to do is we're going to do even a 10-minute walk a day, or if that's, or we can break it up into 5-minute walks. Let's do 3 5-minute walks a day if that's, if the 10 or 20-minute walk is too much. It doesn't have to be in one block of time. Just the more consistently we're moving, the more we're going to get a result. So even just from that aerobic point of view, let's just move several times per day. Just being really consistent with that and trying to move as much as possible. And we can really make it simple in that term. And even from the resistance training point of view, we don't have to get too fancy with it. If we're thinking large muscle groups, legs are pretty big, so we can do something as simple as doing a sit to stand, which is you're sitting down in the chair, you're standing back up, and then you're sitting down again. Okay, so it's like doing a squat but onto a seat essentially. Those are pretty simple things that I think most people would be able to do, and it's going to have a great effect on managing that type 2 diabetes and lowering the glucose levels in the blood. So it's all about making it small and achievable, and then over time working our way up, and slowly. But everyone is capable of doing it.
And part of your qualifications is to work with those that may have some injuries or, conditions, maybe it's some sort of arthritis or osteoporosis that they have as well. So you obviously know what to do and how to work with those clients that may come with those additional conditions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most definitely. Like a common comorbidity is having peripheral neuropathy. So having that reduced feeling in your hands or feet, or even pain and sensations through those areas. So one thing to keep in mind is to check your feet just to make sure there isn't anything nasty happening down there, which is quite common. If you don't feel your feet, you wouldn't know if you've had any trauma down there or anything building up. With that peripheral neuropathy as well, in the feet, if you have that loss of sensation, it can affect balance. So that's another consideration we'll take into account. So we can make sure we're exercising them in a safe way, while also trying to improve their balance to prevent falls from occurring. As you can imagine, if there is a fall that's occurred, they're going to be a bit hurt from that, a bit shaken up, and it's going to reduce their likelihood they're going to continue exercise, which is just kind of snowball their condition. So we want to keep them on track and moving in the safest way possible, essentially. There is a lot of other comorbidities as well. We could dive into it, but another common one is just your heart health as well. That's commonly affected or comorbidity with type 2 diabetes. So we'll do a thorough check of that prior to commencing exercise as well, and making sure the intensities are safe for that person as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And just in terms of just the common areas that you see these clients, like, because I certainly see it is that they have got so used to a certain lifestyle, and having now to break those habits and get into a more vigorous, more active lifestyle with changed eating. There's a lot of change, and it can be quite a journey for them. So is there some tips that you have in terms of how to make that journey a bit easier? I mean, obviously you've got that element of accountability that you provide as their exercise physiologist and seeing them and helping them along. Is there some tips that you could share in terms of helping, to really get started and then keep that momentum going?
Yeah, I think, just trying to find out what motivates them is a really important thing. It's trying to get them to understand what can happen with type 2 diabetes if it's not managed properly. And it's not fantastic, and nobody really wants to hear about it. Sometimes you need a little bit of tough love just so they understand it. Obviously, as a health professional, you want them to get the best outcomes. So in that regard, sometimes you have to be a bit cruel to be kind. But Not always. Some people are generally pretty good. And for people that don't move, obviously it varies a lot from person to person, but say for someone that doesn't move often, they haven't moved in a long time, and that, walking 500 meters is out of reach, or just an example, building up to be able to hit that, say in 4 to 6 weeks, we can walk half a kilometer an hour. Like, that's a huge tick for someone. That's a big milestone. And it's breaking it down to the smaller, more achievable things that we can do that are still working towards our goal. I think it's very important, so they can just tick some boxes along the way to building up those lifestyle habits and just remaining overall a bit more in control of the diabetes.
Absolutely. Finding that hot button that really gets them going and, gets them out of bed and gets them going for the day. What is it and how, like, if they get on top of the management of this condition, how will enable them to fulfill, what they love doing, whether it be spending more time with family. I recently had a client come to me and he's, starting to gain weight and feeling, just not as mobile as he used to be. And he said, I've got 4 young kids. I want to be able to keep up with them. I want to be able to play with them. And so he's really motivated by just, wanting to be there for his kids and be able to play and enjoy, and be part of their lives, as opposed to, this someone that can't participate in what they're doing and playing the games. So I can, really like that linkage you've drawn to, what is really inspires that person, and, tying that management of type 2 diabetes into that inspiration. And then, as you said, it's, starting small and building, as opposed to, So in terms of, when I work with clients with, come to me with type 2 diabetes, or they could be a little overweight. And again, it's generally that insulin resistance, or, as you alluded to earlier, that lack of insulin sensitivity. So some of the nutrition strategies to improve that insulin sensitivity are certainly reduce calorific intake as a whole. And this is where some of these fad diets that are popular at the moment, such as the 5 and 2, or the time restricted feeding, that 16 and 8, those sort of approaches, they do serve that purpose of reducing the total calories consumed in a day, and that fast. So even like a 12-hour fast, or up to a 16-hour fast, really helps the body start to will certainly start the repair work that needs to happen. Allows the body to get on top of the inflammation, and then allows the body to then better manage blood glucose. So that blood glucose dysregulation, as you alluded to, can be contributed by stress. So helping the person manage stress at the same time is really important. And one of my strategies that I employ is, getting them to see an exercise physiologist, because that is a great way to alleviate stress, as well as improving insulin sensitivity. So it's that killing a bird with one, or killing 2 birds with one stone. Reducing overall calories is fundamental, and there's so many ways of doing that. It really comes down to personalization as to what will work for that person. The other important point around nutrition is reducing the carbohydrate intake. So essentially, the Western diet is, it's really high in carbohydrates. It's excessive, but again, it's not going keto. I mean, obviously, the keto diet will be advantageous and can be a strategy, but you don't need to jump from one extreme to the other, like going from high carb to just virtually no carb overnight. See that, again, it's swinging that pendulum. For me, it's helping the client find that center line, and that center line that works for them, and so that enable to do that and enact on that strategy for a lifetime, or till it serves what they're using it for. And it could be to get on top of the management of type 2 diabetes. So certainly, reducing carbohydrates as a high. So, and it's really the high GI. So it's the foods that are really high in the glycemic index, and that's essentially high glucose count. And they're foods like cakes, biscuits, and yeah, lollies. You can just imagine all the foods. I think most people would know what those high GI foods are. And then eating more foods that are, I guess, more slowly absorbed by the body, that are, have less of a glycemic index and less of a glycemic load on the body. So those foods, generally your whole foods that you'll hear about. So it's really cleaning up the diet and eating more whole foods, eating less processed foods. Processed foods will contain more sugar. Sugar's cheap, so they just load it with sugar. It saves them money. They make more profits. It tastes good for the consumer, and it's in a way for the in that way it's win-win. But in the case of type 2 diabetes, it's yes, the commercial person wins and the type 2 diabetes person loses. So consume less processed foods, eat more whole foods, and so that's whole grains, it's legumes, it's nuts, seeds, beans. So really expanding your palate and embracing more vegetables is key, because part of this condition is needing the body to help manage the inflammation. There's generally these people with type 2 diabetes are quite inflamed, and so having a diet rich in whole foods will help lessen the inflammation and then enable the body to get better in control of the blood glucose regulation. So that's, I guess, in a nutshell. But again, it needs to be personalized, just as the exercise physiologist does in terms of personalize the exercise prescription to the client. A nutritionist will personalize the nutritional plan to the client based on their preferences and their lifestyle. So it needs, for example, I recently saw a client this week with insulin resistance and was doing night shift, and that night shift's going to continue for the next 18 months. So it's not going away. And we know that night shift's certainly going to have a negative effect on improving insulin sensitivity. So it's, again, working with that client and working strategies that really fit in with giving the client the best chance to optimize their health whilst they're undergoing that sort of lifestyle. So that's probably, have you got any questions for me, Stefan, in relation to?
So what kind of strategies would work best to help someone kind of make that transition? Would it be maybe substituting certain foods out or being a bit more prepared with the eating? What's your kind of go-to things to go from?
Yeah, so it does, again, vary from person to person. I'll have those people that will say, I'm just too busy, I don't have time to prepare. And I can, work with those. I mean, because the supermarkets are so moving more health conscious, there's generally like pre-made salads in the supermarket. So it's, go into the supermarket, buy a pre-made salad. You can get a Caesar salad, or you can get a nice mixed green salad, and then go and get a tin of tuna. I mean, it's very basic, but that's, if that person's time poor, it's putting the tuna on top of the salad and putting some salt and pepper. And that is not too bad. I mean, I have it myself. So it's those sort of working in with the clients, but it definitely comes down to preparation. So the more time you put into preparation, just like with exercise, the enhanced outcomes, the greater success you'll have. And so I, like you, sit down with my client and talk to them about the benefits of preparing their own food and how to make it enjoyable. So I mentioned that dad that wants to spend more time with his 4 children and, play with them. Kids love getting in the kitchen and playing with food, right? In terms of making a creation and contributing to the family dinner. So that's a strategy I employ, is actually helping the father then come up with ways in which he can get the kids involved with preparing a meal. And so it can be quite simple, and it's just really just stepping through the process and showing how simple it is, as opposed to people just thinking it's complicated. So Yeah, so definitely the preparation's key, and like going shopping and making sure your cupboard's full of whole foods. If your cupboard's full of quick, ready to go processed meals, then that's what's going to be consumed when you're running around, trying to meet your work deadlines and life deadlines and whatnot. So really important that the right food's in the house to begin with, and that again comes back to preparation. So putting aside that time, but again, the supermarkets are making it easier for us with, home deliveries and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Another strategy is, I think like you, it's starting small. So as you mentioned, the substituting or swapping things out. So what I'll start is with the clients, what they're currently eating, and I will just tweak things about what they're currently doing in their diet just to take them towards better managing their type 2 diabetes. So it's not totally do without what you're doing, and make it really difficult and throw this in and do this. It's okay. We'll just swap out coffee with green tea, for example. We'll do. And again, it may be enabling them to have that morning coffee, but then not that one at lunchtime and one in the afternoon. It's saying, well, then let's find a substitute after the morning coffee for that's going to better serve that outcome that you're trying to achieve. And then, some of the substitutes are just looking for better grains in more of a whole form. So it could be, going from white rice to, to brown rice, or to wild rice, or, introducing quinoa, other types of grains. With vegetables, it's just, expanding the colors of which they're consuming. So it's, again, as you had it's all about that substitution. It's all about finding the time, making the time, and aligning it to what they ultimately want to achieve by better managing the type 2 diabetes condition.
Yeah, most definitely. I think what you're touching about before as well, where you said it's the body's having an inflammatory response, and you manage that through nutrition, which is really important. And then exercise also has anti-inflammatory properties as well. But it's great to see that both of them coming together and working together. I think one of the main takeaways from this is that it is a lifestyle condition, essentially, and there is just so much we can do around to prevent or just have really good management of the condition. Like we just spoke about so much as well. I'm sure there's even more we can speak about, but there's just so much that can be done to help manage it. And I think it's just so vital to take that kind of lifestyle approach and make that slow, steady change over time. So just going all out at once and being kind of disheartened because you're thinking this is a bit hard to do. That slow, steady change over time will just end up being, it's just that 1% every day, but over time that just goes crazy. You just make really, really good results from that.
100%, Stefan. And the other one is, you just touched on it. It was, there's others. There's that, that sleep. How is the person's sleep? And as you know, both nutrition and exercise really help with getting a better night's sleep. And reducing the overall caffeine consumed during the day. Obviously applying movement, which, increases adenosine. We know adenosine's linked to that tiredness and needing to replenish and getting a good night's sleep. So, so certainly helping the client getting some sleep routine, I find, is really beneficial, just because it also helps with what they then choose to eat the next day. Because if they're sleep deprived, they will struggle to find the motivation to exercise or the energy to exercise.
Yep.
They'll furthermore want to consume high calorific food because the brain is wanting to stay awake, and it knows what helps it stay awake. It's high GI food. It's your chocolate, it's your lollies, it's your sugar, cakes, everything like that. So so if they're not sleeping well, I find they don't eat well, and they'll struggle to get around to doing the exercise. So I really find that sleep element a really key part of the puzzle.
Yeah.
What about?
Most definitely. Sleep, it's just so important. And I bias a good night's sleep over doing so much, because I just know that if I don't sleep well, I'm a cranky old man and I don't do the things I want to do if I don't sleep well. So yeah, I think it's super important, just for your overall health as well. So I definitely will bias sleep over doing a little bit of extra something. But yeah, and then as you said, like a lot of people come with the excuse, I'm too tired to do something today, I'll do it tomorrow, and then that tomorrow becomes the day after, and it's that snowball effect from there. So just being consistent with those good habits that really helps to kind of cement things in and really make good choices over time.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also being accepting that you're human and you will have those days where you're really struggling for whatever reason, and that you miss that exercise, but not then, sabotage the whole plan by then thinking, oh, just give up and, it's all too hard. It's, so what I encourage my clients is that, you'll fall off the rocking horse or whatever. And just as kids do, they'll get back on, or, you stumble as you're learning to walk, but you'll keep trying to walk. And again, type 2 diabetes is one of those conditions where you'll have your good days, your not so good days, but as a whole, you want to be moving in the right direction. And so you might have a really great day on exercise, but not so good day on nutrition, but you shouldn't beat yourself up over it. You should just continue forward and realize that over time you'll pick the pieces up as you go along. And as you mentioned, it's those 1%ers each day. We're not looking or asking for a lot. It's just, what is that incremental improvement you're doing today? Like, is it an extra 500 steps or 1,000 steps in a day? Or is it that you're going to have a salad instead of a sandwich for lunch? And it's just those incremental changes that then, just build and snowball in a positive way.
Definitely, yeah. I think people will get better and better and at finding strategies that work for themselves as well through exercise, and I'm sure nutrition as well. For myself, I find exercises they enjoy doing more than others, and we obviously want to favour that as long as it's kind of still hitting the guidelines and still going to achieve their goal. So as long as they're doing that, there's a bit of variety in what we can do, which makes it fun. But just finding what works for them and what they enjoy doing is super important, because that just makes it so much more sustainable long term, which is what we want to achieve. We want to achieve that whole lifestyle change. So super important.
Yeah, no, totally. It is all about that sustainability and being able to maintain the momentum. Really appreciate the discussion we've had today, Stefan. It's been very insightful in terms of, or something else has just popped up whilst I mentioned this, is that I find that when my clients are exercising, they just automatically or want to eat better. And so I really find that exercise is fundamental around what they eat. And then you probably find it in terms of their exercise performance is fundamental in terms of what they've eaten,
Yeah. And in the same way as well, where they've started eating well and then they want to start doing exercise as well. So that's that flip of the coin, but I just see it from my end first.
It is. It's very true. And I even find with myself, if I've done exercise, I generally just have this gravitation towards more whole foods. It's quite incredible the how each area interplays with one another, and how it's important that the clients, the listeners, approach it as a whole. So I really appreciate your time in terms of coming on the show and sharing your knowledge and wisdom on this topic of type 2 diabetes and how exercise plays a fundamental role in terms of that management of type 2 diabetes and increasing that insulin sensitivity, which will ultimately get them to a state where their body starts to heal and correct itself. So thanks once again, Stefan, for coming on the show.
That's right, Anthony. Thanks for having me on. I think it's really good to see both sides of how we approach the condition, and seeing both angles is really important for the overall view of the patient and understanding how other allied health professionals deal with these kind of things. So, thank you for having me on. I think it's really good. I always learn a bit coming on here. So, thank you.
100%, and the listeners, I'm sure, would also understand that from the point of view that they're getting that holistic approach to the condition. So I think and just realizing how health it's not just one aspect that you need to work on. It's the whole, and that gives you greater outcomes and how they all interact and help, feed one another in a positive way. So, and listeners, thanks for tuning in to another insightful episode of Me and My Health Up. Really appreciate you listening in, and stay tuned in for more insightful episodes. If you've enjoyed the episode, please share it with others, particularly those that you know that might have the condition of type 2 diabetes. It's really important that we get the information out to those that most need it, so that we can best support as many people as possible. And before we go, I forgot to ask Stefan how the listeners can reach out to you.
So I'm part of longevity exercise physiology. So I'm based in Melbourne in Coburg. So you can find me if you go on the longevity website. But most of our clinics are based up in Sydney. So if you're a Sydney listener, there is quite a few clinics up there from Randwick, Marrickville, Neutral Bay, Drummoyne, there's a few others there. And we're also based in Canada now, which is pretty cool. So we're going global. So I'm down in Coburg. So if you ever want to reach out, please just Google longevity exercise physiology in Coburg and you'll find me there.
Absolutely, listeners. And I'll have that link in the show notes. Thank you once again, Stefan. Really appreciate it. And thank you, listeners.
Podcast disclaimer. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it do not constitute medical, healthcare, or professional advice and are provided for general information purposes only. All care is taken in the preparation of the information in this podcast. Connected Wellness Proprietary Limited, operating under the brand me&my Health Up, does not make any representations or give any warranties about its accuracy, reliability, completeness, or suitability for any particular purpose. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it are not to be used as a substitute for professional, medical, psychological, psychiatric, or any other mental health care or healthcare in general. Me&my Health Up recommends you seek the advice of a doctor or qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Inform your doctor of any changes that you may to your lifestyle and discuss these with your doctor. Do not disregard medical advice or delay visiting a medical professional because of something you hear in this podcast. This podcast has been carefully prepared on the basis of current information. Changes in circumstances after publication may affect the accuracy of this information. To the maximum extent permitted by the law, me&my Health Up disclaims any such representations or warranties to the completeness, accuracy, merchantability, or fitness for purpose of this podcast and will not be liable for any expenses, losses, damages incurred, indirect or consequential damages or costs that may be incurred as a result of the information being inaccurate or incomplete in any way and for any reason. No part of this podcast can be reproduced, redistributed, published, copied, or duplicated in a form without prior permission of me&my Health Up.